but it was the time spent in the field with great people. It's not the kills, it's not even the flights, it's about sharing them with people that you respect and admire, and there was an element at times of wanting to show people that I was this falconer that knew what he was doing. But falconry has a way of bringing you back down to earth.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast, and we are now at episode 98, and really hope you guys enjoyed the last series that we did for Mexico. I'd like to go ahead and also take a moment and introduce one of the newest sponsors of the podcast, being Bobby Yaga Crafts from Poland. He makes some really great handmade quality stuff, and if you're not familiar with the equipment that he offers, it's definitely worth checking out. The past couple of seasons, I've used his anklets with Marshall's Easy Twist nuts sewn into them, and I've enjoyed them so much that I will definitely continue using them in the coming seasons. And what I also like about him is he's always working on refining his products and equipment that he makes, trying to find better ways to improve the quality. So I will continue to use his products in the future. I really, really enjoy them. So, like I said, if you're interested in checking them out, hit him up at Baba Yaga Goshawks on Instagram, and here pretty soon we'll have links on the website as well. We're kind of in between series right now. We have a few really cool things planned for the short term, so hopefully we will have plenty of content to carry you through the next few months at least here. Always have things in the works, but most recently I attended the spring rendezvous at the Archives of Falconry in Boise, Idaho, and I'm really happy that I got a chance to attend this year because I finally got to meet in person some people who I had some previous correspondence with but hadn't had a chance to actually meet in person. So one of those people was our guest for this episode, who is Tony James, and I was hoping to get a chance to do this with him last year while I was in the UK, but the stars didn't align and schedules conflicted, all that kind of good stuff, and we weren't able to meet in person to do this. So I was happy to be able to get him and pull him aside one day while we were at the archives and sit down with him and get some of his stories and have him share some of his falconry experiences from past and present as well. So it was a great atmosphere. I'm glad that we had time to do this while we were at such an amazing place like the archives. So I hope you all enjoy it, and I will go ahead and turn things over to this conversation with Tony James. Here we go. Well, and I'm glad that we could do this here also, because with the books and with all of this just amazing heritage that we're surrounded by, all this memorabilia, and I don't know. I mean, what better vibe are we going to have for this to happen anyway?
Yeah, it's a privilege to be here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is what, your second time here now?
Yeah. Came over last year, and It was my first time in the States.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Kent's been the last 20 years trying to twist my arm to come over, and last year was the first time, but I'm so glad I did.
Yeah.
To spend time with Doug Pinio, and
you just never know, right?
Yeah, it just makes you realize that you can't take anything for granted.
No, and it's one of those things where you always just have to take advantages of the opportunities when they come, because if you say no, I can just do it later, whatever. Eventually, there's not going to be a later. But, I mean, I'm glad to have finally gotten a chance to meet you in person. And, I mean, I don't know how you managed to avoid doing this whenever I was in the UK last year. I know a certain couple of people were probably hounding you to do it then as well.
Well, as you know from today, I've been trying to avoid coming in.
It's all good. Everybody thinks it's going to be so much more terrible than what it really is, but it's really just a couple of falconers sitting around talking shop and telling lies, man.
Perfect.
That's all it is. So, well, and I mean, what was your initial reaction, or what was your initial
impression, I guess, of the States? I mean, you picked a pretty decent scenery area for your first time coming to the States, and now I guess second time.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, the people have been wonderful. And I'd heard the legendary kind of appraisal of that, but it was far better than I could have ever imagined. Some fantastic falconers, some fantastic people, and a fantastic place. What more could you ask?
Yeah. It's kind of funny that, such a historical place, ended up in, of all places, Boise, Idaho. But, I guess the circumstances, I mean, and just the way everything turned out, it's about as good a place as any for it.
Yeah. I mean, as I'm looking through the window. No, I mean, ultimately it's down to Kent Carney. What a man. What a vision.
Yeah.
So, and with the announcement that's coming this evening, I think, hopefully you're not aware of it, but there's some significant moves, some significant things have happened. And so
I can probably make an educated guess because, I hear little birdies, whisper every so often as well about different things and possibilities. But But I mean, we'll just have to. That was a heck of a teaser for you to drop there. Of course, probably by the time this comes out, the announcement probably will have already been made. But
everyone will be aware that by then. But through Kent's efforts to get the thing started, and everybody here now is such a professional outfit, and the feel good factor, the connection with the falconry community. Yeah, for so many falconers to be here with not a hawk in sight apart from the wild ones, to have so much camaraderie and so much support, and there's not a hawk being flown. That's quite incredible.
Yeah, I know a couple of friends of mine mentioned that they were thinking about maybe in the future offering to bring some people out to their property and maybe just lure fly some birds or something, just to incorporate some degree of actual birds into in an event like this.
Yeah.
But
I don't think you need it. I think the hawk talk. Just look at the falconers walking past that window.
Oh yeah, making faces at you, and
But no, I mean, absolute household names, if there is such a thing.
Sure.
Some of the guys out there, it's an incredible setup.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I mean, you can only tolerate so many lies being told at once in the same area, in the same place, in the same time also, and if people actually start flying some birds, then it turns into inevitably like, well, that's cool, but, you're doing great. Well, I'd do it this way, that kind of thing too, so.
Yeah, I've tried to avoid these kind of things, but we did a fantastic little thing this morning with Steve Gingran. And he's got this ongoing project. Actually, I don't know if I should be talking about it, but it's
just be vague if you don't know.
No, it's a lovely project, and he's nailed a few people down to just talk for a few minutes about a favourite hawk, and I'd never really considered that before. It was something that we have hawks. When they're lost or when it comes to an end, we have the next hawk. And to actually put some thought into a favourite hawk and the reasons why it's a favourite hawk, and giving it some thought. My favourite hawk was one that shared more than a decade of my life, and it was the memories of spending time with so many great people. She was actually produced by a wonderful falconer who's no longer with us, Matt Gage. And even that, everything. Ultimately, it's about the people. She may not have been the best falcon I ever flew, but she was the one that was dearest to my heart, because she shared such a fantastic decade of my life, and that included some of the guys walking past the window here.
Yeah, no, I understand, and like I said, it's kind of funny because that's usually one of the things that we broach on too. We always like to hear about people's favorite either hunting stories or birds or a combination of both, because sometimes they're intertwined together. And but What qualities made that bird your favorite bird or most sentimental bird?
Yeah, literally. Yeah, I'd flown 3 sisters from that breeding. They were all good hawks. The last of the 3, through my kind of efforts to contain her a little, they flew quite exuberantly, and she became a much less exuberant hawk than the previous 2. But it was the time spent in the field with great people. It's not the kills. It's not even the flights. It's about sharing them with people that you respect and admire, and there was an element at times of wanting to show people that I was this falconer that knew what he was doing. But falconry has a way of bringing you back down to earth, and there were occasions where she didn't perform as well as I'd hoped, and in front of people that I might have wanted to impress. So
imagine that.
But yeah, I think as you go through life, I think you become less interested in kind of promoting the idea that you know what you're doing, and you just enjoy it, and you get as much pleasure watching someone else showing you what's possible. And that's been the story of my life, really, is trying to learn from other people and emulate some of their successes and develop some of their skills. So, yeah, I've invented nothing in falconry. Not many people have, but yeah, I've tried my best to emulate some of the people who do it better than I do.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, it's we always joke, me and my group of guys, you can always tell whose bird's out of the box and who isn't, whose isn't. It's funny because sometimes the fun really begins whenever your bird's back in the box.
Yeah. It's difficult. I think the older I get and the further down the road I get, the more inclined I am to think. A friend of mine, Dave Eslick, the last falcon I took up, he came out with a line that kind of shocked and amused, but is absolutely right. He said, "It's my job not to mess it up." That's basically, that's my job. The less you do to mess a falcon up, we all know how to train a falcon, but we don't always know how to train ourselves. So
it's very true. But yeah, I mean, sometimes though, especially when it's been a really hard day out in the field and it's just, conditions aren't the best. You've already walked God knows how many miles. And sometimes, whenever you finally get that catch that goes in your game bag, or whenever it's finally just time to, you just know it's like, okay, it's time just to stop, get somebody else's bird out. Sometimes just the extra weight that comes off with your game bag as you're putting everything back in the truck and stuff. It's sometimes it's nice to just be able to be the heckler, go from being the heckled to the heckler.
Yeah. I never made a mistake when it was somebody else's flight.
It's a very good statement. But yeah, well, so I know we've already kind of talked about this some this weekend, getting to know each other a little bit, but can you go back into what initially sparked your interest in falconry, what got you going, and some of your initial experiences then getting into the sport?
Yeah, I kind of would. It was something that goes right back to being 5 or 6 years old, and a school teacher of mine kept hawks. I'm sure he wasn't much of a falconer, but in his garden there were hawks on blocks and bow perches and whatever. And yeah, I'm just fascinated, glaring over the top of his fence at these things. And it just kind of infected me. I guess that was the moment. I didn't even know falconry existed, but there was something magical about them. And yeah, I guess it was a few years after that, discovered a book that had it was just a sporting encyclopedia. And I looked up falcon, and there it was, falconry, with a picture of some medieval scene or something. But it was enough to make me realise that it existed. by the time I was, well, my first hawk was a kestrel, but by the time I was 15, I picked up a big female Finnish goshawk imported from Finland, and my education suffered. I stopped going to school, and I was doing all kinds of little tricks to not be at school and be out with my goshawk. And around about that time, I discovered there was such a thing as bird abatement, you'd call it, but scaring birds from runways or military air bases. And I just fell in love with that notion. That was what I wanted to do. So by the time I was 15, I'd been for an interview. As soon as I left school, that was where I was headed. And the school were fairly keen for me to leave. So I left school at 16 on the Friday and moved to Wiltshire on the Saturday to go and work with the hawks. And at that stage, I thought I knew something about hawks. I thought I was quite clever. But the guy I went to work with, he showed me that I knew nothing. And over the coming years, right up to this day, really, he still shows me things that put me on the right path. Wow, when was that? That was 44 years ago. I went to work there. But and he's remained an inspiration since then, and so many other people I've met either down there all those years ago, right up to today. I'm meeting people today that are inspiring. And some of the talks, people joke about the telling lies, but wow, there's some talented falconers here. So all the time, right through my life, it's been about. Once I'd got over the stage of thinking I knew something as a teenager, everything has been about listening and learning.
Well, and you said the other night, if I remember correctly, that it was a period of like 3 months that you were kind of skipping in and out of school or something like that.
Yeah.
And they were.
yeah. No, it was terrible. I was forging my mother's signature on sick notes, and I ended up after 3 months of not being at school and just flying the goshawk, and I ended up being discovered, and from then on it was pretty much in handcuffs.
and then how was it that the school eloquently worded the letter to your parents again? How was that?
Thanks. Tony is invited to leave at the earliest legal opportunity.
Oh, man.
I was hoping to avoid the worst of my past.
It's all good. Well, let's keep talking more about the good parts then.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was your origin, getting into it. And so, I mean, whenever you started learning from your then mentor, did you work for a while then doing the abatement stuff, or did that pan out at all? Or how long did you do that?
Yeah, that particular period of my life is a period I look back on fondly, and I was lucky that the guy I was working for was of such quality that I had an education in falconry that not many people are lucky enough to have, and frankly, I didn't realise, probably even at the time, how fortunate I was. It was kind of, everybody's life is, everybody's life is the real world, and you imagine that everybody else is in the same situation. But no, I was extremely fortunate, and of course, at that same time, I was fortunate enough to be in a part of the world where Jack Maverick-Goddardo lived, Roger Upton lived, Leonard Potter lived, Jim Chick. I'm trying to think of others. Ted Roberts. There were falconers, dedicated falconers that showed me, kind of demonstrated a kind of an image of a dedicated falconer that became imprinted on me. It seemed like normal life, It wasn't a case of playing around with it. It was something that you dedicated yourself to, and that was expected of you. by example. You know, the people I saw, they were dedicated falconers. Yeah, and I'm sure you've heard of Roger Upton. I'm here with his son, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
People like that, it was their life. You know, there was no, what you might call, as my friend would say, no dabbling. You know, it was, you give it everything you possibly can, and you make every effort to do everything as well as you can. So, yeah, I was very fortunate at that stage of my life, because that was what I became imprinted on.
Mm-hmm.
So everything from there, really, any success I've had owes its existence really to what happened back then.
Well, I mean, that's a good foundation to have, being able to be around guys like that, and like you said, just kind of learn the do's and the don'ts. And yeah, I mean, we all are really so impressionable once we get into this. And as I've discussed with many people before, finding the right people for you, especially because everybody's different and learns differently, but finding the right people to kind of ingrain yourself in this culture, so to speak, it's everything. It's either going to make or break what experience you have.
Yeah, and it's largely, unfortunately, it's largely a matter of luck. You know, if you happen to be in the right place at the right time, you know, I often think my life could have been utterly different as a falconer if I'd ended up in a different job in a different place with a different guy showing me the ropes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was just my good fortune, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, and did you end up doing that for a really long time, or did you end up branching into a different career? Or
I did it only for, what would it be, 3 years or so. 3, 4, 5 years. And then I moved into the family business, making furniture, which isn't ideal, but the grounding was already there. You know, had it been the other way round, I'd have probably learned from somebody with very little skill. I'd have been taken under the wing of somebody, as I was before I moved to Wiltshire. Somebody who kept a couple of hawks, didn't really fly them, didn't really do much at all, and that's the luck of the draw. You know, if that had been my first few years, I'd have probably been quite content and modelled myself on a different image.
Sure. Well, and during that 3-year time span that you were doing that, then did you find that, kind of like, you know, some falconers that I know who also do abatement, they sometimes experience burnout and sometimes run into the whole thing where, you know, it stops being, you know, their normal falconry stops being as fun because they're dealing with, you know, everything. Did you ever run into that at all?
Well, I can understand that, but it was good for me because it was a stage. It was largely because I was with the best guy I could possibly be with. So we were, it was crazy, really. I look back on it and think, getting up in the morning and heading off to fly a goshawk, then maybe we'd fly the lanners and luggers, you know, for the bird control, or really for pleasure, but it certainly appeared to be bird control. I think we had at least one sparrowhawk. I took a sparrowhawk under license that year. I think that was the first peregrine came along that year, flying merlins at larks. Pretty much to the end, right to the end of the day, and heading out with my goshawk. So it was almost dawn till dusk hawking, but I was with the most enthusiastic guy possible. You couldn't get burned out. You couldn't be anything. Yeah, you couldn't be anything other than just in love with it all. You know, it wasn't. I've seen a lot of friends that have done similar things or worked at bird of prey shows or such like, or even breeding hawks. You know, I've seen lots of people burn out because it's hawks dawn till dusk. I've had stages in my life where I've started to worry whether I'm going to be as excited at the start of the next season. But yeah, well,
It's never really been an issue for you.
no. And when you're surrounded by friends that are such dedicated falconers, and as long as you remember that falconry is a passion, it's not something you have to do or forced to do. You do it because you want to. As long as you remember that and don't get carried away with any other aspect. Yeah, but yeah, I get it. People could get burned out. I've just been fortunate that the people around me are such a joy. It remained a pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, there's some guys that kind of eventually go into the realm of being completely like in solitude with their falconry. Like they don't want to share it with anybody, and that's totally fine. But I can't imagine doing what I do every season without the people that I do it with.
Yeah.
And, I think it just makes such a huge part. It's kind of like my sponsor, he basically, whenever I was initially learning from him, he was very adamant, and that, really it's kind of like what you mentioned earlier. It's not always about the birds and the flights. And a lot of times it's about, getting out with the guys and having fun and and like you said, it's nobody forces you to do it. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to stay fun.
Yeah. I mean, I've spent time in the field with some wonderful falconers from all over the world. It's strangely, because I focus so much on the joy of that, it's easy to forget that actually 6 days out of 7 I'm in the field on my own. And I enjoy seeing a hawk fly and practicing falconry on my own. The special times with friends are much less than the solitary times. I enjoy the whole thing. So perhaps I ought to not give the impression that my life is one big falconry party. But so most of it is a solitary pursuit for me. But the friends make it really special.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a time and place for it all. There's some days where it's just not possible, and but. Yeah, once again, it's all about what you make it, And,
And that was something that, again, because of the friends I met early on, your life, all of those people, they fitted life around falconry. They didn't fit falconry into life. Mm-hmm. Falconry was the thing that made them organise their lives the way they did. I saw that as being a requirement.
Yeah, and it gets harder and harder every year too. In some ways. I kind of regret it. Not regret, because I hope I have been a good husband and a good father. But there are times when you think, "Wow, have I really been that selfish?" For sure. Yeah, trust me, I understand completely. Hence why, there's times where it's just like, I'm so glad that I have an understanding family, because, I mean, we're sitting here having this conversation all the way across the country, and, they're at home doing their normal thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many instances in that I've been able to make those pursuits, and without that understanding and I always joke that I think half the time it's planned on her part anyway. I think she enjoys her time away from me plenty of times also, but I totally understand. I mean, I think we all have that little lingering voice in the back of our minds occasionally that occasionally remind us that, you might want to occasionally back off just a little bit.
We sat not in the bar, in the lobby of the hotel last night, and I was telling Laura McGow some horrendous stories about the first year of my son's life, and the poor little thing being dragged out hawking, and I won't share the stories because they are horrific, and social services would probably be after me. But I very nearly lost a son before his first birthday through just a selfish obsession with hawking. If it hadn't been for someone looking through binoculars and me looking to see what they were looking at, and yeah, my baby son had fallen out of the Land Rover window and wandered across the stubbles.
Oh, wow.
So no, and you can't help but look at things like that. They're funny stories now, but
Sure.
So, yeah, my son's a professional lad now doing his own thing. But so you look back on it and think, wow, could I really be that selfish that the flight was everything? So, if my son ever listens to this, I apologize.
Well, I'm sure he probably will at some point, but no, isn't that ironic too, how some of the funniest stories that we have in our lives always start off by being the most horrendous. There's some irony to that, isn't there?
Yeah. So, no, we've been very fortunate. Falconry's brought me into contact with, we were saying this earlier, it's brought me into contact with people from every walk of life, people that I would never have got to meet any other way. So my life's richer for all that Falconry's brought into it.
Sure. Well, I can say the same, and I think most people can. If they're fortunate enough to have a good experience, I think they say they can as well. But and so what point did the book obsession start with you? Or I don't even know if I should call it an obsession. The book passion, interest. When did you start amassing your library?
It started right from the beginning. I've still got the first book I had signed for me by my then sort of hero. I kind of worshipped Glazier when I was a schoolboy, and I've still got As the Falconer Bells that he signed for me when I was 14 years old. And because of my time in Wiltshire, of course, I found myself there at just the right time for Roger Upton's Bird in the Hand, Mark Allen's Falconry in Arabia. And of course, I was lucky enough to be meeting these people. And, so it was Jack Mavro, Hawk for the Bush and Falcon in the Field. There were people that I'd take my books along, get them to sign, and I never intended to have a library. I never intended to have a collection of anything. It just kind of happened.
Yeah, I don't think anybody does.
yeah, and of course, at this stage in my life, it's quite a few years down the line, so you can't do anything for that long without learning something about it. So none of what I've done really has been deliberate. I don't think. It's just there's a passion for it, and as time goes on, if you don't learn something about what you're interested in over such a long period, you'd be a pretty sad person, I think. So it's I'd love to think it's not an obsession, but it's certainly verging on it.
Yeah, well, I've been privy to some conversations that you've had about some of the ones that you've gotten, and I'd have to say that I think it's probably not borderline anymore. I was trying to use my wording cautiously, but let's just be real. It's an obsession.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, some of the guys here, we've been, the present, the exchanges of gifts has been phenomenal here. Every time you turn around, you're either giving something to someone or accepting a gift from someone. And I think for me, some of the books I have, I would guess maybe 100 books have come to me as gifts. And they're the ones I'm more obsessed with, because each of them carries a memory. And each of the ones that I've had signed by friends and people I've met along the way, each of those becomes a special memory. So it's I'd like to say that it's all about the information inside the book, but actually there's a lovely little sideline to that is the memories that come with them, and some of them are just beautiful things, just beautifully put together, beautifully bound. So it's a fine line between reading a falconry book and learning something, and frankly 500 odd falconry books at home, and I've learned something from each and every one of them. Some of them are masterpieces, some of them less so, but you take something from every one of them if you're prepared to look for it. But then there's the nicely bound ones and dedication copies and things, and that is verging into the territory of obsession, because you don't need it. It's not essential. You're not going to learn more from a beautifully bound book than you would from some 5-year-old reprint. The words are the same, but there's a magic to some of the old books that I appreciate.
Well, and I know for me, as many people know, I've collected lots of different things throughout my life. I had an obsession with vintage comics and vintage, toys and
things. I
things.
remember hearing that.
Yeah. And so, for me, a big part of the obsession there came with feeling like I had something that was part of history,
Yeah.
And I think that this really isn't any different. Like the fact that you might have this copy of a book that has somehow lived through all of whatever obstacles it's had to live through over potentially hundreds of years, and you're fortunate enough to still have one of these that there's not very many left of, and having kind of that, I don't know, that weird feeling of some kind of satisfaction or whatever it be from that. There's it doesn't help the obsession factor. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Again, it makes no difference to the words. But if for example, I've got a book from 1891 that was Lascelles' copy, Gerald Lascelles. Other books that were Jack Maverick Godato's or Fisher's or whoever, famous falconers of the past. It adds magic to them for me. It makes no difference to the words, but yeah, there's a historical context that I enjoy. Of course, I'm involved with Mark and Paul and David at the British Archives of Falconry, and that's part of what we do. We're interested in the history of falconry, and obviously that's part of the reason why I'm here.
Sure. Well, just seeing some of the stuff that's here, and then whenever I was fortunate enough to be able to meet Mark and do the episode with him at the British Archives, and he was showing us some of these journals and stuff that you all have there, and that are, well, more or less, you could use the word priceless, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. In commercial terms, maybe they're worthless. There are some of the things that we wax lyrical about in market terms. Yeah, maybe they're worthless, but to us they are priceless.
Well, and really any kind of intrinsic value that any object has is determined by people. Like, somebody needs to want it.
Yeah.
There's always that too. But like I said, as far as the practical knowledge aspect of everything that we gain from these books and stuff, though, the things that are in some of these journals and the things that are written, and you can't put really a value on being able to learn or kind of go back and review other people's experiences and memories and stories. And
there was a stage in British falconry, a stage pretty much in Western falconry. For a lot of years, falconry was not in a good place. It wasn't well understood. There weren't skilled practitioners you could learn from. And so there were books there, and Kent Carney, the Bait and Slice Society, reproducing Burt, reproducing Latham. The American falconers were very good at tapping into the historical literature, and had a much better understanding than I did of the quality of it. There was some real gems of wisdom. We perhaps weren't so good on our side of the pond, even though that's where much of it originated. We didn't make as good a use of it. And falconers of the 60s, 70s, they had a tough time. They didn't have here you could speak to just about anybody and learn an awful lot. There weren't the people for them to learn from, so they were almost having to rediscover the art. And rather than be critical of what they achieved, I actually think we should be incredibly grateful, because they were the shoulders we then stood on. It's the same thing. It's a process. If each of us, any of us, can do something to help somebody else, it's good for the art.
And that's kind of the point of all this, because I mean, without that and without that passing down of knowledge and stuff, this isn't going to be just like everything else in life that eventually dies out,
Yeah.
And if we don't want it to die out, then we have to find ways to dutifully, I guess, in a way, pass on the knowledge to other generations, and do it in a way that other generations are also going to accept what's being passed down as well.
Yeah. I do. I mean, the toughest thing for us now, I think most Falconers, we might appear a insular, grumpy group at times, but most Falconers are more than happy to help anybody that shows signs of commitment and dedication. The biggest problem we face really nowadays is the environment, the lack of quarry. So maybe there'll be other quarries, other flights develop. Who knows what the future holds? I've carried on doing a traditional branches of falconry. That's getting harder, and people following on the next generation it's going to be harder for them than it has been for me, even with help. But
well, the birds always find a way to adapt.
Yeah.
I
I mean, falconry, there will be adaptations to a degree, but for me, the dream would be that we managed to address some of the environmental issues that so that next generation of falconers can enjoy some of the things that I've enjoyed and friends of mine have enjoyed.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to go through the effort of passing down all of this to future generations if they aren't able to do anything with it other than just have it be a memory, Ideally that's not what we want to happen, but hopefully it doesn't. But I mean, so real quick also, we have to kind of broach on this a little bit as well, because I know you initially weren't really keen on taking the task on yourself. You were trying to get a friend and to kind of undertake the task, but eventually, what was the deciding factor for you to take on such a big burden or task of translating one of these books? I mean, and about how long did it take you to really feel like you accomplished the task?
It was something. In fact, I've just given it to Rocky, my first copy of it. But 2006 edition, I was introduced to Gomer. A French friend told me it was a classic. I needed to read it, and frankly, I struggled. I really struggled. All manner of things, modern technology helped to make it a lot easier to get the basics down quickly. But I was struggling, and I'm certainly not a good French speaker. But I was encouraged. John Loft, who translated Darcusia, Sonulaire, and Harmont, actually doesn't speak French. And I was round at his house one day, and I was shocked to discover that. I imagined he'd be fluent. So that kind of gave me some encouragement. I was hoping John would do the work and translate this last one. But no, I ended up, I had a year or two of one finger typing and slowly working my way through it. But in truth, what really made the difference, possibly by a number of years, if not by its very existence, was there'd been a previous translation in 1954 that was held within the archives. And that was a revelation. Most of the basic translating wouldn't need to be done, and it had obviously been done by someone who was a non-falconer, so there was an awful lot to do putting some of those aspects straight, and then with expert help from friends around the world, aspects of it that I'd misunderstood, people were able to steer me in the right direction, and slowly over a period of, well, it had been years, but the final bit ended up maybe 6 months, maybe a year, just to correct little bits that I'd misunderstood and get to the best translation I possibly could. Without that help, and particularly without the help of Kent and John, it wouldn't even exist. But I'm so proud that a team effort actually brought it into existence. I think it's a wonderful book. It's a book that predates the English equivalent in Bert. So it was 1594 rather than Bert 1619. So it's all completely original. It's from first-hand experience. And so, I'm really proud to have been involved in it.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, there's lots of aspects of falconry and some falconry projects that it can kind of take a village, so to speak, to make happen. So,
yeah. Oh, this certainly. Kent just. I mean, it's so flattering. Kent asked me to sign the copy, and I think I wrote something like to my friend Kent, without whom this book simply wouldn't exist, and that's the truth of it. And without the friends that encouraged me and took part in editing, checking, double checking, countless times. It wouldn't have become something that I was proud of, but it has done, because of the village, because of all that help. So it's something. It's never going to be a bestseller. Who in the falconry world wants to read something written so many years ago?
Well, especially not limited to being limited to 250 copies or whatever. Also,
I did it selfishly. I did it for myself, and it's gone from. I wanted friends that had an interest and friends that would benefit from it, because there's some wonderful advice in there. It's all about flying goshawks at partridges, but it's beautifully written and by a obviously skilled falconer, and anybody who benefits from it. I'm just very proud to have ended up being part of putting it out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I read it on the plane flight up here. I finally got a chance to sit down and have some free time to comb through it. And as we talked about before, it really is amazing how, just the basic aspects, the fundamentals in a lot of ways just aren't ever going to change.
No, the hawks themselves, the hawks he was dealing with in the 16th century are the same hawks we'd deal with today. The hawks haven't changed. Various circumstances have, but management of hawks, skilled management, is the same then as it is now, as it will be 500 years from now.
Yeah, the wheel can only be reinvented so many times.
yeah.
Which, in that way really isn't much at all. But
yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and get one really good, memorable story. There's always at least one or two that everybody always remembers at the forefront of their mind. It could be a hunting story. It could be a story about, your favorite bird, anything. And then we'll kind of wrap up.
Quail came over and maybe 5 years ago, and he came grouse hawking with us in Scotland, and then we came back on the low ground and had some flights there. And I'll confess, I wanted to try and impress him, and there was one particular flight that I thought was impressive. The falcon was a nice pitch above me, directly above, and we flushed the partridges, and down she came, and I can't remember if she took one or not. I believe she did. And inside, I tried not to show it, but inside I had this rosy glow. I'd shown Hub the perfect flight, and Hub in classic Hub way, yeah, kind of nice. He said, I don't really like the vertical stoops. I prefer them coming in from an angle. And but it was a great lesson for me. We had a beautiful flight that really satisfied everything I wanted in life. And Hub is a falconer that I have the greatest admiration for, a great friend. But it made me realise that we're not all looking for exactly the same thing. And that was actually a good lesson for me. You know, it's nice to try and impress a friend, but it's nice to realise that the friend might not be impressed by the same things. It's an art with so many facets and so many different preferences and so many different opinions. And I kind of, when I was younger, I'd argue over opinions. Not anymore. I love the fact that people have got different likes and dislikes, and yeah, that suits me fine. You know, any committed falconer, whatever it is they enjoy, that's great.
Sure. And yeah, and I guess we can go ahead and end with, I've been asking this question for a while now, especially, I like asking this question, especially with really experienced falconers that have been doing it for decades and decades. But if there's one piece of advice you could give or leave for anybody getting into the sport, future generations, or even current falconers, what would it be? And we'll go ahead and close with that probably.
I don't know if it's great advice, but my advice, particularly in these days of the internet, where people don't know the lies from the truth, my advice would probably be to get out in the field and look for people who do exactly what you'd love to be able to do yourself. If you see someone doing something that you aspire to, they're the people to try and learn from. So forget the smart comments on the internet, forget everything. But if you see somebody that does the very thing that you most want to do, stick with them.
Amen. Yeah, amen. Yeah, sometimes the School of Falconry Facebook is not the best option by any stretch.
Yeah. I mean, there's positives to it, but actually out in the field, look for the best practitioners and see if they'll help you.
Yeah. No, it's I agree. Yeah. Now and if you ultimately want to be flying a certain species on a certain quarry, then getting out and learning the fundamentals and from different species with different quarry can help you initially get into it, but it really helps to have firsthand experience with people. Learning that particular style. So.
Yeah, and once you've got your foot on the ladder and even when you've climbed halfway up it, you can refine it with advice, with reading, with falconry should be an ongoing process of learning and refinement.
Yeah, and a continual process of taking the information, processing it, and making it your own. And with the more experience that you garner over time. Well, perfect. Well, I think that is probably as good a note as any to end on. And I'm going to have you sign my copy after we get off of here. And yeah, I mean, thank you again so much. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you the last couple of days, and I'm glad that we could make it happen. And I appreciate you accommodating me, even though you've done your absolute darndest to escape the clutches of the of the podcast. But like I said, thank you. It's much appreciated, and I'm sure that people will get something positive from it. So appreciate your time.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
All right. Well, let's go and I think the remembrance ceremony is about to start. So yeah, we'll hurry up and get on over there.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.